Welcome to the HRLocker podcast. On today's show, we have Sasha White, Managing Director and Employee Experience Lead at wrkflow, a digital employee experience design agency based in Singapore. Sasha has spent the last 10 years working in HR leadership and technology consulting roles with brands like Samsung, Capgemini and ServiceNow. In the world of HR, people are the core of every organisation. Sasha talks to us about her role as an employee experience designer and how she helps companies build positive HR and people transformation initiatives. With people working from their front room, companies need to redesign their workplace to create a positive and productive workplace to keep their employees happy and engaged. Sasha breaks it down for us and gives us some great actionable steps to begin building an EX framework. She talks to us about digitising people management processes to make the remote onboarding experience as seamless as possible, and tells us how we can all begin along the journey of EX. If you'd like to get in touch with Sasha, we have her details with the show notes. Our host is Christelle Rinn, Chief Marketing Officer at HRLocker. This is a great episode. We really hope you enjoy it.
So thank you so much for being with us this morning here where I am, Sasha, but evening where you are today?
Correct.
So almost the end of your day. So Sasha, if you want to tell us a bit about yourself and I suppose your background and where you're working at the moment.
Sure. Well, thanks so much for having me on the podcast. I am based in Singapore, as you said. I run a employee experience design agency here in Singapore covering the region. And a lot of people ask me, what is that? It's essentially design consulting, but with the employee in mind. And a lot of the time this comes under the HR transformation banner. So we work on a lot of people transformation projects, HR digital projects, and really just ensuring that the employee experience is at the heart of the design decision when it comes to people transformation. So that's what I do now. Prior to that, I was looking after the HR transformation offering at KPMG for the region based in Singapore. And part of that was supporting a digital HR solution alliance as well. And then before that, I did some central government consulting in the UK, which was really exciting for, again, HR technology implementation. And then before that, operational HR roles my entire life. So HR VP by trade. And yeah, that's me.
Thanks so much, Sasha. So I suppose one of the main things that I wanted to discuss today was employee experience for two main reasons, being that everybody I speak to at the moment, they think employee experience is something we should really be talking about, something we should really be embracing. But I'm not 100% sure that people are very much au fait with the difference between employee experience and employee engagement. So we spoke about this earlier, I have a bit of a bugbear. So what is employee experience?
So everyone defines it slightly differently, and I think that's okay. I don't think there's one solid definition of this. It is a subjective thing after all. But I describe employee experience as a combination of three things. Why we work, how we work, and where we work. And I think even more simple than that, it is the sum of all experiences your employees have when they work for your organisation. And you could go into the real kind of minor details of what it's like being in the office, right through to the kind of bigger ticket items of how was I onboarded and what was that experience and journey like for me. So I think it is often confused with employee engagement. And I think we could go into all the detail about how do you measure both, how do we document both, or how do each of those respectively influence the employee. But quite simply, I say employee engagement is a product of your employee experience. If you have nailed how, why, and where your employees work, they will be more engaged. It is really as simple as that. The two are often confused, and I get that. I think two E's, they sound pretty similar and they're often used interchangeably by a lot of vendors that I work with, which is totally fine. But experience drives engagement. That's it. Pretty simple.
Yeah, and I think that's the key, is that the employee experience is going to determine if they're actually ultimately engaged in their job. And we are the only people who can control an employee's experience right from the start of their journey to the end of their journey with the company. Do you think that the rise in kind of, I suppose, people talking about employee experience, or the emphasis put on employee experience, is because of this kind of virtual remote working now, or was it just going to be the natural step anyway?
I think it was in part going to be a natural step anyway, but I do think it's been heightened because of this hybrid working, remote working situation that we faced over the last, well, now it's over a year, right? And now it continues for however long. And I think the reason why it's become so popular, and especially here in Asia, which is where I'm based, but I obviously see it a lot in the US and EMEA as well, is because organizations have no choice but to think about their employee experience when they are essentially redesigning the workplace to work from somebody's spare room. And I think a big part of that is thinking about all of the small, minor intricacies of an experience, because you have to curate that or help curate that for your employees to ensure that they remain productive, they remain engaged, they want to join your organization, and they don't want to leave. And I think especially for HR practitioners, we have had to respond very quickly to a variety of issues around people not being able to legally go into the office, vaccine management, safe return to work, which is a big issue for us here in this region. As Australia's opened up, New Zealand's opened up, people can actually go back to the office now. So I just think, experience and curating that experience and focusing on how do we measure it and ensure that people remain productive and engaged, it's unavoidable. And that's why I think it's become so popular for all the right reasons, I think, as well. And I think whilst the broad employee experience agenda has become a priority, I think there are offshoots of that have become even more of a priority. And one of those is digital. So I think, I spoke about this with somebody else here a few weeks back about the onboarding experience, for example. If you are onboarding someone remotely, and in a normal circumstance, pre-COVID, you had a lot of those touch points in person. There was, a relatively paperwork-heavy admin process that went along with your onboarding process, and you could kind of get away with it because you were in the office and you were building that relationship with someone, and you could kind of cover over or smooth over all the cracks of the onboarding process. But when you're onboarding someone remotely, there really isn't room for error. And a big part of that transformation, at least for the clients we've worked with over the last 12 months, has been how do we digitize those people processes so that the remote onboarding experience is competitive and compelling and efficient, most importantly. So I think that's definitely one of the offshoots that we talk about all the time is the digital element of employee experience, not just for process, but also to ensure that people are communicating effectively, they have the right tools they need to get their work done, they are able to collaborate effectively. Again, that's been a real issue, but I think a lot of that still boils down to having the right digital tools and solutions, but also digitizing offline processes. That's absolutely a priority that I've seen come out of that EX focus.
Yeah, and I think you're right that the reason for me why it's become very important in our own company is that we're hiring people, and it's so difficult when people are remote, because exactly like you said previously, if you hired a person, you'd have a cup of coffee with them, you sit down and you'd go through a mountain of paperwork. You exactly like I said, you'd kind of plaster over the cracks that because you're sitting down having a lovely chat with somebody and you're bringing them on to lunch, all that kind of thing. Whereas now, with even just in our own company, it has become this, you have to schedule everything out. You need to make sure that the person is introduced to everybody, to make sure that they're not sitting at home thinking, oh my goodness, I don't know what to do.
Yeah, exactly. You can't get away with it, quite frankly. And I know that was a very specific example. I mean, there are a bunch of other processes as well. But to come back to your original question, I do think virtual working, hybrid working, it has just made employee experience all the more important.
Yeah, I definitely think so as well. And we had somebody from Microsoft a few weeks ago talking about the drop in creativity because of remote working, and I think that it's because you now need to schedule those meetings, right? So again, going back to that employee experience, you have to create an environment where it's okay just to schedule a meeting, and it's okay to that everything works seamlessly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a big part of that, though, is accepting that the virtual ideation sessions that you arrange using a virtual whiteboarding tool are going to suck compared to the real person post-it note ideation, and that's okay. But I think there's a big part of that is being honest with your employees that, okay, it's not going to be quite the same, but we're investing in these tools because we still want to make it somewhat enjoyable for you to do this ideation process.
Are there some organizations who are really kind of leading the way in this area of employee experience that you would look to and say they're doing it really well?
Yes, there are a few, and actually some of the best organizations, and of course I'm slightly biased from an EX design perspective, but some of the best organizations that I've seen out in this region are ones that have dedicated employee experience design teams. So Standard Chartered Bank is a really big one, and over here in Singapore, they were kind of the first to come out with the permanent move to hybrid working, and responding to their employees' needs and making sure that everybody had the equipment and the resources needed to work effectively remotely. So that's kind of one example that I would give. I think in the context of virtual and hybrid working and the last kind of 12 months, a few other organizations I would call out as having fantastic employee experience strategies would be LinkedIn. And I'm sure that everyone listening to this would have seen all over LinkedIn the fact that they had a complete shutdown for a week. They totally acknowledged that their employees were burning out or had burnt out, and decided to just give everyone a week off, a wellness week off. And that's definitely more initiative driven than it is kind of like core employee experience transformation. But I think that's just a really good example of an organization that is listening to their employees, which of course is a really big part of employee experience, is going out and listening to your employees, doing that research and responding based on their needs. And I think LinkedIn did a really fantastic job of that. And I would love to see how many organizations over the next few weeks are going to be coming out with their own wellness week and giving everyone a week off. I think it would be fantastic. So Standard Chartered, LinkedIn's another one. Spotify, I think, again, similar context of this hybrid working environment that we're in now. They were very forthcoming with work from anywhere as a policy, which again, at the core of that decision would have been listening to their employees and conducting surveys and really understanding what is it that we need to do from a policy perspective to ensure the employee experience works for you wherever you are. And I think that they will really benefit from that as well from a talent pool perspective, because they were one of the first to come out and say, look, we trust you to work from wherever. We're here to give you the tools that you need to work effectively, but work from anywhere is the standard, whether that's in an office or from your home, whatever works for you. So definitely I would call out Spotify. And since their announcement, we've seen loads of organizations come out with a similar response to what the future of work would look like for their organization. So and I guess the other one that I love to call out is Canva. So I don't know how many people will know Canva, but it is an Australian business. I believe it just went public, I'm not sure, or it's preparing to go public. And
their CEO is actually great to listen to. I've heard a few of her podcasts, and she's really interesting. Yeah, she's
really interesting, and she's super young as well, which is just so inspiring to see. They have quite publicly shared everything they're doing internally for their employee experience during this time, and I think they have, a lot of what I will describe is quite aspirational. So for smaller organizations or even large organizations where maybe budgets are tight or you don't have all the resource in the world, just take this as inspo more than anything. But they have kind of a dedicated in-house wellness and health expert. They've got an entire space called Canva Vibe, I think, as part of basically an offshoot of their own internal intranet, which is just packed full of resources to ensure that people can work effectively from home. Mental health resources, health and well-being, the right digital tools and collaboration platforms. They are a really good example of an organization that has very quickly spun up a virtual employee experience that actually covers off those key big ticket items like collaboration, communication, all of that stuff. So I definitely point to them as well. So yeah, those are just a few examples, bit of fangirling there.
But I think you are right, is that we're so caught in this topic of remote working and hybrid working and things like that. Whereas personally for me, I think that's where we're at the moment. But I think, who knows, we talk about the future of work all the time and are we in it and what is it? But I think that flexibility working is going to be the driver, because some people may not want to work remotely all the time, and that's okay. And some people may want to do a combination, and that's okay too. And some people may want to do it full time, and that's okay. So it's those companies who are taking that flexibility approach, I think, is going to be the driver of one, attracting talent, but also keeping talent. So that's really going to play towards your employee experience going forward.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think what you're describing is kind of what we see in the consumer space as well, which is personalization. And a slightly more detailed example, but I did some research back end of last year into the return to work experience for new mums. So when they'd gone back from maternity leave, what did a great experience look like? And at the end of that research, like, the overwhelming message was not all new mums are the same, and desires and motivations are very different depending on persona and location and, you know, goals and aspirations or whatever. And I think the same can be said for employee experience and the future of work. We have, for the last 12 months, had to mandate the way that people work because of local legislation and because of the pandemic. But I agree, moving forward, allowing employees to curate their own employee experience from home, or whether that's in the office, whatever it is absolutely the most effective way of building a competitive employee experience.
Yeah, and that it's not that one size fit all. All I think is the key. And again, that's aspirational, but I do think it's the way it's going to work. So again, we're looking at the buzzwords of, you know, employee experience and employee engagement, and companies know that they should be doing something. So how can organizations really invest in the employee experience design to, you know, I'm going to say prepare for the future of work, prepare for digital work, remote working, or, you know, I suppose prepare themselves for the next 12 months, or you know, what should companies be doing?
The first thing that I always say to organizations is you need to go out and do some listening. And employee experience research is a big part of what we do at Workflow. And a lot of this is working on behalf of our clients to go out and understand, how do people feel, and what are the problems with some of the experiences today. So whether that's an onboarding experience research piece, or it's the overall impression of working at the organization, whatever it is, you have to go out there and listen to employees. And I think EX design as a concept is fundamentally very similar to human-centered design thinking, which, for those that are less familiar with it, is about putting the user or the person at the heart of that design decision. And exactly the same thing applies to employee experience and employee experience design. And the first two steps of human-centered design are about understanding and framing problems. And you can only really do that by going out and listening. So I would definitely say get out there. If you're a small organization or a big organization, get out there and listen is one. The second, and this is definitely more my opinion as opposed to the generic employee experience view, is that digital plays a huge component in employee experience and effective employee experience design. If you take a manual process, do some EX research, and then just rejig your manual steps so that it looks nicer cosmetically and might be an inch more productive and efficient, it's still a cruddy process. And I think there are so many technology solutions out there that can, you know, point solutions that are small and affordable, that can deliver significant change and really move the needle on your employee experience. So I think look for those opportunities to digitize, and look for the right platforms that can help you do that.
Yeah, and actually that is something that drives me crazy here, is that, you know, we could get a client who comes to us and they're complaining about their processes and they think they're too heavy and there's too many steps and whatever else. And then they're like, but we just want to replicate that digitally. We're like, well, now's the time to. Just because you're digitizing it still means it's not so good.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you know what? It doesn't have to be a laborious process of, and I've done this before, doing big technology implementations of, right, let's sit in a room for 7 days and decide how many steps do we take out of this process, and let's build this big change impact analysis sheet. And yes, to an extent, those are really important steps, but essentially you're just taking a pragmatic view of how are we doing this today? How would the technology make this easier for us? And how do we align with the technology? And I still think, and we're going down a rabbit hole here of technology implementation best practice, but The days of we get technology to fit our process have long been gone, but we still see that in the project sphere. You invest in the technology, whatever it might be, and you align your process to fit that technology. Otherwise, it's a really expensive investment for not a lot of return.
Yeah, and I would agree with you on that. But I mean, I suppose I'm a huge fan of design thinking, and I try to do it in everything that we do here, that you're really putting the customer at the center of everything that you're doing, and go so far as to put a face and a name on the person, so that you don't forget who you're actually designing for. I mean, so with the EX design, same kind of concept?
Yeah, exactly. So employee personas, big part of employee experience design. So and you will develop those personas through employee listening. So when you know the thoughts, the feelings, the vibes from your organization, you'll be in a much better position to create more org specific personas, and then you design from there. So it's knowing who you're designing for. So absolutely, I agree with you, it's the same.
Does this role sit as a HR role, or is it a CEO role, or where does it naturally fit?
This is a really great question, and someone asked me this on LinkedIn in a public post, and it made me feel incredibly anxious because I hate getting into debates online. No, this is fine. This is a safe space. But I think employee experience is owned by the entire organization, and all organizational leaders have a responsibility to shape and promote a positive employee experience. Because of everything we spoke about before offline, right? It drives productivity, it drives engagement, it's competitive advantage. You will not grow your business unless you have a competitive and compelling employee experience. That's one. However, talking pragmatically about EX, the focus is on getting stuff done. And if the employee experience role or the owner of employee experience transformation sits best in HR, great. If they sit best in IT, great. Yeah. If it is a dedicated enterprise experience team, that's also okay. I just think make the best decision based on your organization, and you're good to go. But I do think logically, and most commonly, especially with the clients we work with here, it does tend to fit with HR, because a lot of the defining employee journeys are owned by HR.
Yeah, and whether that's the starting or return to work or whatever it is, that's just by default a HR function rather than. But I do think, just in my personal opinion, for any kind of EX design or that employee experience has got to be a full company involvement, right?
Oh, absolutely. Because you want to make sure that what you're designing is representative of your organization. Absolutely, I couldn't agree more.
Ultimately, it's great for ideally, rather, a company will go to somebody like you or a company like yourselves, get in an EX designer in and work through the process. For companies who I suppose are maybe just starting out, or who are looking into it, or just not in that position to get in an external consultancy, what kind of steps should they be taking first, or how should they be? What is the easiest way to start the process?
Great question. How do I do myself out of a job? No, I'm joking. I get asked this question all the time, and I'm always happy to share some advice. I think there are two elements here. The first is, it doesn't have to be a huge thing that you get started with, right? So if and I would always suggest you start with a small research engagement. You can do that very easily. You can appoint someone who has a little bit of time to run a focus group, or to start a survey using Google Forms or SurveyMonkey, and gather some data, gather some insights, both qualitative and quantitative, and then get people in a room and start talking about it and say, hey, we spent half a day talking about onboarding experience, and here are the insights. That is low maintenance. It's pretty easy for you to do. And from that, you'll get a bunch of actionable insights, and you'll probably then talk about, okay, how do we take this forward? And so that's quite a simple thing to do. The second thing for organizations generally, or people that are looking to get your teams or your functions more into employee experience as a concept and employee experience design, is to find some design thinking resources and really try to get everybody engaged and excited about it. That is often the challenge that we have with some of our clients and the project teams that we work with on client side, is we talk a lot about EX and putting the employee at the heart of the experience, but doing a 101 on design thinking and getting people bought into that thinking and that framework is key. So I think those are the two things I would say you could do, right? So build your design thinking champion network internally, start with HR if that's where you are, probably is where you are if you're listening to this podcast or whatever function, and then, you know, pull together some light EX research. And again, it doesn't have to be laborious or huge and mammoth. Just start there and see how it rolls.
Yeah, and I think that just for our own internal, when we're doing design thinking, and it's just a thing that I reiterate the whole time, is don't start with the solution. You don't know what it is yet. Even if you think you have an idea, you don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I say this all the time, but a problem well defined is a problem half solved. If you go in with a view that, and often I hate to say this, I've been in HR, but we go in with a very clear idea of what the problem is with onboarding, because we live and breathe onboarding. We do it all the time. And if you own that process and you go out to gather research, there will be cognitive bias that will play a big part in that research process. So you have to be really mindful of that. And you're absolutely right. Design thinking is all about going in with a blank piece of paper and saying, how do you feel about this? Not how do I feel about the problem? What is the problem, you know?
Yeah, and it is hard. It's difficult, but I think that's the merit in getting an outsider in, even for ourselves, to create personas and things like that. We a lot of the time you kind of get blinkers on because you think, you know, you live and breathe it. You think you know what it is, but actually getting somebody else to say, well, you know, fresh pair of eyes to say that's actually not it.
Yeah, for sure. And actually, obviously plugging here a bit, but you know, when we've done these research engagements or we've kickstarted the EX design process for our clients, employees are generally more forthcoming, especially for sensitive topics when it's an external party. And the only challenge with that is that our stakeholders, our project stakeholders, have to prepare themselves for some very frank and often direct and personal feedback. But that is all part of the uncomfortable process of transforming for good. So ultimately people feel comfortable when it's facilitated, and you know, we're quite creative with how we facilitate those focus groups and workshops. You know, we make sure that people are engaged, and we do a lot of what we do in silence, because that helps to remove the hierarchy from the room, which I think can often happen when you do whiteboarding in person, right? You end up upvoting your boss's ideas or saying, yeah, I agree with this person because they've got the loudest voice. Whereas, you know, you've got to really think about how do you create an environment where people feel comfortable sharing direct feedback.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, if I was to sit down with the new hires that we've done and I ask them, well, how did you find the onboarding experience? They're probably going to tell me it was great.
Of course. They'll be like, yeah, fantastic. Can I get that promotion now? Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, it is. And I suppose the hardest part is just to let go and let somebody else, because you're going to get negative. Everybody's going to get negative feedback. I mean, you wouldn't be starting the process if everything was perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, one thing that I would chuck in there that I missed on getting started is setting some really clear objectives and being really clear about why you're embarking on an employee experience journey. So at the start of every engagement we do with our clients, we set OKRs, so objectives and key results. And we say, okay, what is the overall objective of what we're trying to achieve, and how will we measure success? And then we probably need to do a separate episode on employee experience metrics and measures and all of those things, but that's kind of where that leads.
No, but I think you're right. We did some work with a company a few years ago, and which I thought was their measures of success, which is very idealistic, but it was a good idea, was to say that no matter where the person is, if they've just started or if they've left the company, that every single person who comes through the doors of the company is going to be have learned something and have moved on and had a positive experience in the company. Now that is very, you know, that is a very idealistic way to look at things, but like that was their success, that even if the person was here for 6 months or a year, that they still had a positive experience.
Yeah, wow.
You know, and even at the offboarding, which I suppose is a idealistic thing. I'm not sure how achievable the offboarding can be in a positive way, but you know.
I don't know. It is possible, but it's a very it's a process or an employee journey that is totally underinvested, but so critical. And I think more organisations are taking it seriously now. You know, we've seen a real spike in alumni programs. So people remaining connected, especially for the big firms. And that's actually a really effective talent pool and referral pool as well. So I think more and more organisations are starting to think, actually, your last experience somewhere is a defining experience. And if it's a bad one and a sloppy one and it's not digitally enabled, it leaves a lasting impression.
Yeah, and I am digressing a small bit, but I do think also the world that we live in today of public forums and Glassdoor and Facebook and LinkedIn, it's so easy to say something negative.
Yeah, totally.
And it's there forever.
Yeah, exactly. And you can't get rid of that. That is a stain on the internet, and it's very hard to get rid of those stains. So,
it's the truth. So if somebody's had a really negative leaving experience and then they go onto Glassdoor and and write about it, it's we're in a competitive landscape in terms of employment and things like that. So, it's, I think now more than ever, your employer branding is, it's just something people have to take into account. It's just the world that we live in. So thank you so much, Sasha, for coming to talk to us. I've found it really interesting. I'm going to go back to my design thinking notes. Put it into our onboarding experience. Sasha, if somebody wants to contact you, what's the best way?
LinkedIn, probably. I check it every day, so I promise to get back to you.
Perfect. And so at the end of this podcast, we'll have all Sasha's details. But again, thank you so much for taking the time out this evening. It's mine this morning, but thank you so much, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day. So take care.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening. Check us out at HRLocker.com. The show was hosted by Christelle Rinn and produced by Jenny Martin. Subscribe to catch the latest episodes on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you like to get your podcasts. If you'd like to feature, get in touch by emailing us at marketing@HRLocker.com. You can also follow HRLocker on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn.